it's not all smooth sailing, even if you get like the exact tools and everything to start with, there are so many little sort of complications and things, to get through with pointed pen that I see so many students like want to give it up. And that's like really what I want to try and avoid. So I'm here to help a little bit down the line, once you've started with pointed pen calligraphy, show you some little secrets so you do not give up and you keep going.
Hey, I'm Becca with the Happy Ever Crafter, and this week I'm talking to Shinah of Crooked Calligraphy, who's walking us through 5 troubleshooting tips for pointed pen calligraphy. Now, Shinah has been on the show before, and I'll link to that here if you haven't seen it, because that video is like the 1.0 and this is the 2.0. So if you're brand new to pointed pen, go watch the other video first and then come back for this one. But if you've been doing pointed pen for a while and you feel like there are a couple little tweaks that you can make to up your game that much more, this is the video for you. So let's jump right in. Shinah, welcome back to the show.
Hello. Super excited to be back.
So for people who didn't see the first video, which I will definitely link to, I suggest most people go watch that one first. But for those people or people who don't know who you are, can you give us a little rundown of who you are before we jump into this awesome lesson of yours?
Yes, absolutely. So my name is Shinah. My company is Crooked Calligraphy. I just, long story short, used to be a corporate lawyer, was going down that whole like very traditional path, and then jumped ship and was like, this is not for me. It's not working. I'm kind of killing myself doing this. Found calligraphy, and that was about 5 years ago. I've had my calligraphy business ever since, and it's been amazing. I mostly love teaching calligraphy, which is what I did in your first video and which I am super excited to do in this video as well.
So you do majority pointed pen calligraphy, correct?
I do. It was like my first love. Actually not my first love. I tried brush pens and some other pens first, but pointed pen calligraphy is like what I really fell in love with. So yeah, that is what I mostly teach.
So we did sort of the opposite. I started with pointed pen and then I moved more to brush pens. But it's not because I don't love pointed pen. I love pointed pen. It's just for me, like the act of actually getting all of the supplies out and doing all of that is just a barrier for me.
I just keep it all on my desk within easy reach.
Yeah, you have to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so like I mentioned, the first video that I had you come on here and do, in that one we went over very much the basics of pointed pen to get people like into it. And so now maybe the same people are coming back almost a year later and are having troubleshooting issues and like need kind of the 2.0. So that's what we're talking about today, right?
Yeah, if you haven't gone back to watch that first video, I highly recommend it because I literally walk you through, if you have never picked up a pointed pen before, what tools to buy, how to prep them, how to really get started. But I, at this point, have taught, literally thousands of students in just all different settings. And I have seen it's not all smooth sailing, even if you get like the exact tools and everything to start with, there are so many little sort of complications and things, to get through with pointed pen that I see so many students like want to give it up. And that's like really what I want to try and avoid. So I'm here to help a little bit down the line, once you've started with pointed pen calligraphy, show you some little secrets so you do not give up and you keep going, because that's really what leads to a successful calligrapher, somebody who pushes through that stuff and keeps going.
Yeah, for sure. And like I can definitely say I don't know exactly which ones you're going to cover, but I have also taught a lot of pointed pen students, and it's always the same issues. And so as soon as you can like know exactly how to troubleshoot them, you're like smooth sailing after that. And so I'm really excited for you to jump in to your 2.0 lesson. So yeah, maybe I'll just get my face off here and let you do it.
Okay, so I just want to reiterate that good troubleshooting is actually, it's kind of the key to successful calligraphy, because you can start out with the exact tools and everything and the exact methodology, but once you get into calligraphy, once you want to make a greeting card for a friend, a place card for an event, like write on a wood sign, anything, right? Even if you're not going to be a professional calligrapher or do this, for money, you're going to want to like do other combinations of things, right? So I always teach my students like being empowered about your pointed pen calligraphy, knowing how to troubleshoot, that will really turn you into a successful calligrapher and not just like sort of stuck as a newbie, basic, like beginner calligrapher. So I am going to walk you guys through five pointed pen troubleshooting secrets. So these are little things that I just keep noticing. Again, I've taught thousands of students and I just keep noticing these things coming up. So I wanted to give you guys a heads up so that you're aware of them so they don't totally derail your calligraphy journey and you can keep going, right? So I'm going to do this as a little bit of a, you may know, but you may not know this other aspect of it. So number one is you may know, and you've probably heard, that you need to clean brand new nibs once they arrive before you use them. But you may not know the best way to do that. So just to reiterate, like you do need to clean nibs when they come brand new because, let me show you, they come with a coating on them to keep them from rusting. It's great. They don't rust. They also the coating also keeps the ink from flowing down properly. So if you try to use your nib just like this, you'll be very, very frustrated. So I'm sure you've heard so many different ways that you can clean your nib, everything from sticking them in a potato to fire to Windex. And what I have seen my students actually struggle with is a lot of them try all those things, even try like scrubbing with a toothbrush and soap, and still their ink beads up. So you know what I always tell them to do? Maybe you can guess. I'll give you some hints. It's totally free. It's always with you. It's very simple, and it's a little bit icky. So the answer is spit. And I know that sounds a little bit gross, but you're not putting your nib in your mouth. Please don't do that. You don't know where that's been. But what I do is just like a little bit into a paper towel and just wipe my nib. And I swear there's just something in our saliva that breaks down that stuff really naturally. So spit, whenever beginners are struggling with ways to clean their nib, I find that it just tends to work. Okay, so that's a little bit better. Sometimes it takes a few tries, but you want to get to a point where it's coating pretty evenly. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you want the ink to be able to flow down your tines. Okay, so that's really good. So little bonus tip here, and I've also seen students do this, so I just wanted to point it out, is that students will go to all this trouble, clean up their nibs, get them nice and, everything, and then they'll grab the nib like this with their fingers to stick it into their holder and dip it into their ink and be like, what the hell? I just cleaned this thing. I scrubbed it so many times. And the ink is still beating up. So they'll take it out of the holder, clean it again, and then repeat the whole process. And you know what's happening? It's kind of funny, but it can be so frustrating if you don't realize this. Your fingers have oils on them, especially if you've like just put lotion on or if you've touched your face or something. So if you grab your nib like this to put it into the holder or adjust it or whatever, you've just left more oil all over your nib. So just be aware of that. Once you get it in there in the holder, just kind of clean it off, and you should have, use the spit method again, get all that oil off, and you want your nib really to be holding the ink. You want the ink to be coating pretty evenly, and that will ensure that you are starting off with a properly prepped. All right. So just be aware of those two things, and that will save you a lot of frustration. Okay. Secret number 2. You may know that nibs wear out. These guys don't last forever. But did you know it might be because of something you're doing? So let me explain. Again, calligraphy nibs, they're metal, seem pretty sturdy, especially ones like the Nico G, but they need to be balanced, right? They are pretty, they need to be, the tines really kind of together perfectly with no space in between in order for this to function the way that it's supposed to. So naturally, they just kind of wear out and get misaligned with use. So this is one just like more sort of exaggerated example of a nib that has become misaligned. You can kind of see that the tines, I don't know if it's showing in this video, but the tines are not together, right? They're not lined up perfectly together. One is higher than the other. There's space between. When a nib is like this, the ink just does not flow properly down the nib. So nibs do get worn out, but it depends on so many factors. I get asked so often, how long does a nib last? Like, how long can I use it before I need to change it out? And the answer I give to my students, which is kind of infuriating, but I do want to empower them with information, is it depends. So let me explain a few things. One, different nibs wear out sort of at different rates. The Nico G, which a lot of beginners use and which I recommend for beginners, is a pretty sturdy nib. It's made with stainless steel. It's fairly thick. The tines are pretty kind of wide and they don't get misaligned too often. This guy, the Brous EF66, it's much more delicate. When you sort of look at it, the tines are just thinner. It's more flexible. It just is more prone to getting misaligned. Same thing with the Hunt 101, which is another popular nib, just is more likely to get misaligned. So first of all, it depends on the nib. Second, it depends on how you're writing with the nib. And here's something that a lot of my beginner students don't realize. Obviously, how long a nib lasts depends on how often you're actually using it. If you're using it 3 hours a day, it's not going to last as long as if you're using it for 20 minutes a day. But if you are pressing really hard, if you're very heavy-handed, right? So let me give you an example. You can write a downstroke like this, or you can write a downstroke like this, right? Same nib, totally different pressure. So if you're writing with this pressure, your nib is going to wear out faster. But here is actually the number one thing that makes your nib wear out faster is opening up the tines sort of unbalanced, unevenly. So if you notice, I was opening up the tines evenly. Okay, so if you think of the tines, my fingers are the tines, they were opening up like that, right? But if you use your nib at just even the slightly wrong angle like that, then the nib is opening up. I'm going to imitate it with my fingers like this, right? So if you keep pushing down on the nib with the tines like this, eventually it's just going to stay like this. And the tines will sort of never snap back together fully. So when a lot of pointed pen beginners, their nibs will be kind of nice and smooth at the beginning, but then within a few days, it'll get misaligned. And that's usually the reason why, is you're off a little bit in your nib angle. So that is something to watch out for and be aware of. Because trying to force a misaligned nib to work for you is just so frustrating. The ink doesn't flow down, it's way scratchier, the tines get snagged on the paper, you might get ink splatters, you might get paper fibers stuck, just a whole host of problems that you do not want to be dealing with when you're trying to learn this like pretty complicated craft. Okay, number 3. So you may know that nibs can get misaligned, right? So I've just told you that, you may have heard it. But did you know some nibs, they just come manufactured wrong from the get-go. So I have run into nibs, and again, this kind of depends on what brand of nib this is. But for example, this Hunt 101, I don't know if you guys can see, let me try and get this to sort of focus here, but one of these tines is just way thicker than the other. Right? I know it's a little bit hard to see in the video, but you can tell that there's just like a chunk on the right tine, and the left tine is much more sort of pointy, and it even looks a little shorter. So this is just, the nib came like this. It came manufactured like this. And if I was to try and use this nib, it would just not work right. Like you can just see that the ink, I got ink on there, but it's just not starting. And when it starts, it kind of doesn't, it's very scratchy and it just doesn't, it doesn't continue to flow. So I, I've like used probably hundreds of Nico G nibs. I've actually never run into a Nico G nib that has come manufactured wrong, but 101s, I found a fair number of those. Browse EF66. Again, they're so delicate that they can come with the tines already misaligned. The Leonard Steno, that I found a little bit misaligned. So if a nib is just not working for you, you've got everything right, you've done sort of everything the beginner guides say, it was working, and you've cleaned it and everything, and the ink is coating, and it's just not working for you, it might be the nib. And that's just a good thing to know so that you don't think that something is wrong with you. And just finally, if a nib is like this and it's just manufactured wrong and it's not working for you, don't even try. Like, I've heard some people can maybe grind this down with sandpaper or something. It sounds like a pretty advanced level thing. I've never tried it. To me, I find it's just saves my sanity to just chuck this nib or use it for ink splatters or something else and start fresh with a new one. It will be so much nicer when you're doing your calligraphy practice, and you won't have to wrestle and fight with your tools. Okay, number 4. You may know that you need to slow down when you're doing calligraphy, especially pointed pen. It is not something that you write quickly like you do cursive handwriting, right? But did you know going fast can actually cause some unattractive sort of letter forms and strokes? And let me show you what I mean. So going fast is not just like, it makes it kind of hard to control the ink flow. It makes it hard to form, basic shapes and letters that you are not used to. But it can also, a lot of my students, say they're making and this is like really exaggerated, but do you see this point right here? And I can kind of do it a little bit less exaggerated, but similar. So if you notice that your letters and your writing have these sort of, they don't look so great, right? What you want is a little bit more of a nice rounded or squared off, right? If you like that look from copperplate calligraphy, you want a more intentional look, right? But a lot of students end up with these little like kind of flicks at the end. And that is from going too fast, right? You see that if I'm just trying to write quickly and I'm lifting up my pointed nib at the bottom there, it's going to create that little arrow. Whereas if you go slower and really end deliberately, it will create a much nicer shape on the bottom. So I know that you hear, if you have taken any calligraphy workshop or class or anything, I'm sure you've heard the instructor say, slow down. There's a good reason for it. There are many, many good reasons for it, but this is just one of them that you might not realize is happening because you're going so fast. And number 5 is, you may know that the way you hold your nib, the nib position, the nib angle, all of that is super important. But did you know a couple of degrees, a very small thing change, it can smooth everything out. So this is probably the tip that, when I tell my students, they're like, oh my God, it changed everything. And it's so subtle. So here's the thing with pointed pen. It can feel so frustrating because you don't know what you don't know, right? And you feel like you're doing everything right. And it can feel like you're so far away, but really you may be closer than you think. So let me demonstrate. And this ties back to my first point that I was making about nibs. So the way you want to use your pointed pen, and this, like the basic fundamental techniques, again, are in the first interview that I did with Becca. So I encourage you to look that up if this is all brand new to you. But the way that you're supposed to use your pointed pen, right? You want the tines, again, to open up evenly, right? Like I was demonstrating before, you want the tines to really have even pressure on both of them, okay? So that's the ideal. But for a lot of beginners, there is a tendency for your nib to really kind of droop down like this. So it's like your nib, the pen, is sort of spinning counterclockwise in your hand. And it's just something I see happen with so many beginners. And it kind of makes sense, right? You're pushing hard on this. You're not used to the instrument. Pushing kind of, there's a tendency to kind of pull the nib down. And if you don't realize it, if your nib has kind of fallen, sort of rotated down like this, you're writing just always on the side, sort of slightly sideways on your nib. So your nib is just kind of doing this the whole time. And that can lead to weird ink flow, ink blobs, it feeling super scratchy, the upstrokes being really thick. So let me do a little demo here. All right, so this is kind of how you want it to be. And if you rotate on your side, this is how it can end up. Okay, you can really see the difference there, right? And it's just from this tiny little rotation here. I don't even know how many degrees this is. Not the greatest at math, but it's small, right? It's really subtle. So what I always tell my beginner students to do is if you find this happening to you just constantly, is try, instead of starting like this, start out and rotate a little bit clockwise and try just writing like this with your nib like this. Okay, I'm going to show it to you again because it's so subtle. You're starting off with a vent hole facing straight up towards the ceiling. So if there's a line going from the center of that vent hole, it's pointing straight up towards the ceiling. But you want to rotate a little bit clockwise. Okay, so you want to rotate that pen body clockwise just a little bit. And what it does is it kind of counteracts that pull, that natural pull going this way. So it kind of helps you to stay at an angle where your tines are going to open more evenly. All right. So if you notice yourself really falling down like this, try that little rotation and just see how that feels. See how different it is. A lot of students try this and they're like, oh my God, it's so much smoother. Like it feels really different to them. All right. So that is my troubleshooting secret number 5. But what I wanted to tell you overall, and this is kind of a bonus tip here, is pointed pen. I mean, I know that there are lots of beginner guides out there and lots of teachers saying like, this is exactly how to get started. And that's great, right? Because you need that guidance at first and you need to know exactly what to do. But I have found from teaching so many students that it can be really, really personal. Like some people prefer thinner inks. Some people prefer thicker. Some people write super heavy-handed. Some people write really, really light. Some people prefer like a thinner pen like this. Some people prefer those big, chunky, thick pens. So I encourage you to sort of embrace like becoming more empowered about your calligraphy. If something is not working for you exactly the way you feel like it should be working, the way an instructor has told you, try, experiment. Like see if a thinner ink works better for you. See if another nib works better for you. And it might just be that for your particular grip and hold and, writing experience, a slightly different combination of tools and techniques might work better for you. And that's totally okay as long as you're getting the results that you want. So I really like to empower my students to explore and experiment and follow my overall troubleshooting method, which is number 1, when you practice, be really critical and intentional about it. And notice when the nib is feeling really nice and it's going for you and it's flowing. Notice when it's not going so well and really think about, okay, when is that happening? Is my nib worn out? Is it right after I dip into ink? Is it when I'm getting to the bottom of a page? Is it when I'm sitting in a particular way? Like notice that stuff and then start to adjust and figure out what works particularly for you. So that's step number one. Step number two is if something is going wrong, always check your tools first, right? You could be doing exactly the right technique, doing perfectly everything right, and your nib's just worn out. And that sucks, right? To feel like you're doing something wrong and it really is just your tool that's kind of failing you. So always check your tools first. And then if you like switch to a brand new nib, still having the same problem, switch, maybe try thinner ink, a thicker ink, still having the same problem, then look at your technique and see what you can adjust. So that is sort of the overall troubleshooting methodology that I teach to my students. And, then you can ask the right questions and get the correct answers you need, right? Whether that's from a resource like my course and community, or if that's just searching something on YouTube, right? Or a blog or something. Once you understand what the actual problem is and you've eliminated, maybe it's the tools, all those things, then you can go about looking for the actual answer that will move you forward so that you are not constantly spinning your wheels and being frustrated and giving up ultimately, because that's definitely what I don't want to happen.
Okay, awesome. Shinah, I have one question that I know someone in the audience is sitting there wanting to ask so badly right now. What about troubleshooting issues if you're a lefty?
I am not a lefty, but I've taught so many lefties. And more importantly, I've heard from so many lefties, can I even do it? And my answer is always, oh my God, you can totally do it. There are definitely some extra adjustments that you will need to make, but you can totally do calligraphy as a lefty. Please don't let that discourage you. So my best piece of advice for lefties is I would start out with a straight pen instead of an oblique. I really like lefties to start out with a straight holder so they really can get a sense of their angle and their placement. It's best to underwrite, okay? And that just means your hand stays under the baseline of the writing so that you are writing like this and your hand stays under the whole time so that you are not smudging what you are writing. So using a straight holder, it really just kind of helps eliminate the whole, the confusion of just having another angle to sort of deal with an oblique holder. But once you get this down, many lefties do switch to an oblique holder and they find that angle helps them. But it really helps to start with this first to understand how you want to actually grip your pen and angle it.
That was one of the things that you mentioned that I really liked, was to experiment, and you can understand all of the troubleshooting stuff and understand how the pointed pen works, but it's always different depending on your exact grip and your exact angle and your exact the amount of pressure you put on your pen. And so I think it's really tempting for especially beginners to listen to the expert and be like, okay, I need this nib and this holder and this ink. And then when it doesn't work, they're like, screw this. This doesn't work for me. And it's well, yeah, but you will be able to make it work for you. You just have to experiment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And it's when people are afraid to deviate from that even a little bit because they feel like they need to get it exactly right, instead of realizing that, hey, if you're going to do this calligraphy thing, there is so much trial and error involved. You're constantly asked to write on new types of paper, use a different color ink, write bigger, write smaller, do acrylic signs, all the cool, awesome signage that you do, Becca. You're going to get thrown that a lot. And it feels amazing to be able to answer that with okay, I'll give it a shot. I'll try it out and I'll see what works. And I kind of know the troubleshooting method, and I know that I can ask the right questions to figure it out. Mm-hmm. That's being empowered with your calligraphy.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. Okay, so Shinah, we have the 1.0, the 2.0 now, but for people who want to dive deeper, tell us where they can find you, your courses, all the things.
Yeah, I am Crooked Calligraphy on Facebook, on Instagram, but I hang out a lot on Instagram. My website is crookedcalligraphy.com, but I also, just for you guys, have a freebie. I'm going to take all these troubleshooting tips and put them into a PDF for you so you can refer to them, without having to scroll around in the video. So I will have that freebie for you at crookedcalligraphy.com/thehappyevercrafter. The Happy Ever Crafter.
I just did the same inside joke as last time.
What, with the forward?
No, the
And the
praise
backwards?
hand. The praise hands.
The praise hand.
It's an inside joke for people who have seen the last episode with you. And if not, go watch it.
Go back and weigh in.
Love it. Okay, well, thank you so much, Shinah, for coming on here again. I know people will find this very valuable, as they did with the first one. And I'm sure, eventually we'll have you back on for something else too.
Yeah, I would love that.
All right. Well, thanks
Becca.
again, and we'll talk to you later.